Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Coming up, the Alberta government is letting voters fire politicians. We Charity reminds us why it's a good idea. And do pro-lifers have a place in the Conservative Party of Canada?
The Andrew Lawton Show starts right now.
Welcome, everyone, to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show on True North. My great pleasure to have you aboard. And if you don't like the show and you are listening from the province of Alberta, well, you can actually get me turfed as the show host before the show is up. I think that is the practical implication on podcast of the new RightNow Act tabled this week by Alberta Premier Jason Kenney and his Justice Minister, more specifically, Casey Madhu. The bill would do what we've talked about in the past. It would allow voters in Alberta to fire their MLAs, city councillors and mayors and reeves, and even school board officials between elections if they feel that they are not up to the job at hand, if they feel they are underperforming in their public duties. This has been a big grassroots democratic initiative that a lot of people have pushed for going back years in Alberta. I think as far back as the 30s, it was a big push by the Reform Party, but has never really materialized in the modern political era. In fact, in Canada, it's just in British Columbia, after whose recall policy Alberta has modeled this one, which was a UCP and Jason Kenney campaign promise in the 2019 election. Here's a bit of an announcement from Premier Jason Kenney.
Alberta's government has kept its word, introducing a recall law in Alberta's legislature. That's a commitment we gave to Albertans in the last election, to be able to hold their elected representatives in this legislature to account. And that means, through recall, that if enough constituents sign a recall petition, they can force a by-election if their representative has completely lost their confidence. We are fortunate to live in this great democracy, but we can always make it better, and we can always improve accountability. Recall does just that. Alberta last had a recall law in the 1930s, and a lot of different parties and politicians have talked about it since then, but no one's actually done it. I'm proud that Alberta's government has introduced the recall law into the legislature after having consulted with Albertans about the right details in that law. It'll be debated and we hope passed later this month, certainly in this spring, and giving Albertans more power to hold their elected representatives to account. Another promise made and another promise kept.
What Kenney says there basically is that the taxpayers and the voters are the driving force in democracy, and all elected officials need to be accountable to them. Now, in the past, I'm going to be perfectly candid, I've had mixed feelings on recall. I've always had the view that elections themselves are the recalls. But at the same time, I also think that there is an argument in favor of a mechanism that allows people to deal with politicians directly, not because they have a better alternative, but because they think that individual MLA or councillor is not fulfilling their duties. So how it's going to work if this bill passes as is planned for MLAs is different than how it will work for councillors. So I'm going to focus more on the MLA portion of it here. Essentially, if you want to, as any ordinary Alberta citizen who is a constituent of, say, Jason Kenney or of Rachel Notley, you have to be in their riding, you can apply to the Chief Electoral Officer for a petition. You have to give a reason for why you want to get rid of them, but the reason doesn't matter. You could be like, I don't like the color of his hair, I don't like the tie, I don't like that thing Rachel Notley wore. You can do whatever you want, doesn't matter. And then if you get 40% of the eligible voters in that riding to sign your petition, there is a recall vote. And if you have that recall vote and a simple majority votes to recall them, they're gone. You now have a vacancy. Now, it sounds simple, but in actuality, it's a very difficult process. 40% of the eligible voters. Getting 40% of the people out to vote for someone in an election is going to be hard enough. Getting them to sign a petition between elections when a lot of people aren't paying attention to politics will be very difficult. So this is, I guess, where it becomes complicated, because a lot of people want the bar to be a lot lower, whereas at the same time, you don't want it to become weaponized and become this thing that's used by sore losers, where anytime someone you don't like wins, you just want to go right to recall. And actually, for that reason, there's a fairly compressed time frame here. There's just a 2-year window in a 4-year term in which you could recall someone, starting 18 months after one election and ending 6 months before the next election. Again, they don't want to make it so that just right after the election you say, okay, I'm going right to recall. I don't like this. But I should know that these really come down to the questions of how and not if. And the committee process can look at that. They're trying to use BC as an example. I talked about this a few weeks back with Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, a big proponent of recall, and he said that the high threshold actually lends legitimacy to it. This is a little excerpt from my conversation earlier in the year with Franco. You have elections. The point of politicians being elected for terms is that voters can go and turf them if they don't like the job they're doing. Why do you need a stopgap? Why do you need something between elections?
Well, I mean, of course, elections are an important accountability tool, but the problem is that they're only once every 4 years. Now, imagine if a boss was only able to hold their employees accountable every 4 years. I mean, certainly you would see employees misbehave, maybe not show up for work, or do things of that nature, right? And so the same thing applies here, because let's remember, it's the people who are the boss of politicians, not the other way around. Politicians aren't our boss, we're their boss. And as such, we deserve the right to hold them accountable, not once every 4 years, not just during an election, but all year round and every year during that mandate.
One concern that I have, I mean, we know full well the polarity and polarization of politics, not just in the U.S., as we've seen with the events of this week, but even in Canada. We know that there's a lot of right versus left divide all the time. Is there a risk that recall could be a bit weaponized in a way where, you know what, let's say you're an NDP voter, you vote NDP, you don't like that a Conservative wins, regardless of how well they do, you want to just go right to that recall process because you don't like that they won in the first place?
Well, you know what? You bring up a really good point. But I actually see recall legislation as doing the opposite. I see it as a very productive way to channel frustrations into the democratic process, right? Because right now, if we're frustrated, we have to wait 4 years to hold politicians accountable. I mean, what choice do we really have? But with recall legislation, we can take our frustrations, we can take our anger, and we can put it into the democratic process. And that's why I see another reason why recall legislation is so important.
And the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, of course, has called this a big win. Franco said to True North, "It's a big win for government accountability. We always deserve the ability to hold our politicians, including councillors and mayors, accountable. And Kenney's recall bill gives us that ability." But in true infomercial fashion, but wait, there's more. The day after, the Alberta government also introduced the Citizens Initiative Act, which is similar to voter recall, except instead of focusing on politicians, it focuses on policy. As an Alberta citizen, you could advance policy to the political process, and that also means recall and rescinding of policy. So if Alberta were to, in a parallel universe, put forward some carbon tax, you could actually use recall in the form of citizen initiative to get rid of that, which, by the way, is what British Columbia citizens did with HST. And this was actually a fantastic moment in Canadian political history. The BC government imposed a harmonized sales tax, a direct referendum was held, led by Citizens Initiative, and the result of it was the repeal of the HST, reverting back to the provincial sales tax in conjunction with the regular federal GST. And this is key. It was narrow, 54.73%, but an example that it is possible. And I guess that's why BC has had a bit of a roadmap effect for the Alberta government. So the question comes down to, should there be a mechanism to fire politicians between elections? And if so, then you can haggle over the details about what percentage of voters and which, and so on and so forth. For councillors, it's significantly different. You don't actually need a recall vote. You just need 40% of the population of the riding, which includes non-eligible voters, 40% of the population of the riding to sign the petition, and if they do, the person's gone. So if you don't like Mayor Nahednenshi, you don't like this councillor, you don't like that school board official, it's a little bit different for school board, but you have the ability to get rid of them if you can rally enough support for it. So the question comes down to, is it punitive or is it corrective? Does this make politicians behave more accountably to know that this is possible? And that, to me, is the game changer. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if it's made BC politics more accountable, but it is a tool. It's a tool in the Democratic toolkit, and this was something that was brought up by the Alberta government officials yesterday, which I think there's a lot of truth to, that it gives voters some power over their politicians when it is so easy for the electorate to, by and large, feel somewhat helpless. When I shared this story yesterday, someone had said, well, this just seems like a populism, to which I say, well, can you blame them? Can you blame them? The reason that populism is happening, and I don't use that in the sense that the mainstream media likes to talk about evil, scary populism, but I mean populism in its pure and most genuine sense. The reason it's coming about is because people are finding that there is a greater and greater divide between the representatives of the people and the people who are supposed to be represented. And when there seems to be a larger and larger chasm between the elites and the everyman, people are going to want to reclaim that process. So anything that does that, I shouldn't say anything, but things that do that are worth consideration. And I think that the ability to recall politicians, well, again, I have questions about it, is coming from a very pure place, which is demanding accountability. And doing this would put a lot of issues, a lot of public policy issues directly to the people. And again, if politicians aren't representing you, it is the voter, it is the citizen who gets to decide whether someone is not fulfilling their end of the bargain as a public representative. And because that was the concern, is that, well, if the chief electoral officer has to issue these petitions, do they have to decide whether a person has good reasons? No, all they have to do is basically say, did you fill out the form correctly? Are you a resident? Great, problem solved. Do I want this to be weaponized by special interest groups, by third-party groups? No. And that's why you need to have a high threshold. But at the same time, if you have this as a tool, I see it as being a big win for democracy. So we will talk about this more as we see the details unfold. And again, if you want to weigh in on this, let me know. My email, andrew@andrewlawton.ca. We've got to take a quick break. When we return, more of The Andrew Lawton Show here on True North.
You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Welcome back to the Andrew Lawton Show here on True North. We're starting a new segment. It may not be a regular segment, depends how long this thing goes on, but it is the Won't Somebody Please Think of the Children segment. Roll that intro.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
You know what? I don't even think I need to play this next clip. I believe that The Simpsons has encapsulated what Mr. Kielburger said very clearly in front of the committee. It was quite masterful. In a minute and 11 seconds, he throws a grenade at the Liberal Party of Canada, throws another one at the Conservative Party of Canada, and then he also implores everyone to please think of the children.
The stated mandate of this committee is to investigate pandemic spending. Here's a simple fact. Given a chance to do good for 100,000 students and other charities during the pandemic, we charity agreed to help. That's what charities do. They help where that is needed. We didn't advise the Prime Minister and Mr. Trudeau not to recuse themselves. We never prorogued Parliament. We're not involved in the decision to filibuster the committee this fall. This is a political scandal for the government, not We Charity. The government hid behind a children's charity by letting it take the fall for their political decisions. And the opposition allowed them. Not a single member of Parliament has spoken up for the millions of Canadian children around the world who benefited from this organization. And as MPs, of course, you have the power to summon who you please. So let me ask you, after a year of political games, what's been the result? What have you accomplished?
Now, the context of this was testimony from Craig and Mark Kielburger before the House of Commons Ethics Committee. Testimony that, by the way, it was like pulling teeth to actually get them to show up with their lawyer looking increasingly uncomfortable beside them all. And I guess We Charity thought that its previous course of action to just plead ignorance and say, oh, there's nothing wrong with what we were doing, wasn't working. They needed to provide a suspect. They didn't want it to be them, so they offered up Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, as you heard there, and quite masterfully. Even if I I think that both the Liberals and we are suspects and culprits in this. I think that if they are just throwing grenades at each other, it ends up working out very well for Canadians, who never should have had to deal with this malignant alliance between the Trudeau apparatus and We Charity, which, despite their claims, is more in the business of helping itself than helping children. So at the same time, you look at this unfold, and there's some truth to it. Justin Trudeau did scapegoat We. He was called, and instead he decided to just put We out front and center and claim that the Liberals had nothing to do with it. We itself has done that. Oh, we didn't have any correspondence with the Prime Minister's office. We didn't talk to them. We didn't, yeah, they were even claiming that in the meeting yesterday. But Pierre Poilievre had the receipts.
What was the role exactly of Mr. Chen, senior advisor to the Prime Minister, in setting up this program?
I don't think he had any role in it.
Mr. Is that the answer for both of you?
Yes, that's correct. Who are you referring to, sir? Can you repeat this, please?
Ben Chen.
There was no role.
Craig, no role?
Not that I'm aware of.
Then why did you send him a message on LinkedIn on June 27th saying, "Hello, Ben. Thank you for your kindness in helping shape our latest program with the government. Warmly, Craig."
Sure. So I sent 100 messages because I only had 8 people on LinkedIn before that. And so that day, 100 messages went out. My EA sent them to people to join on LinkedIn, and he was one of them.
Yes.
I actually didn't, but
sorry,
my EA did.
Craig, this is your message. It's signed by you. And if I could be clear, it doesn't just say, "I wish you well." It says, Ben, excuse me, "Thank you for your kindness in helping shape our latest program with the government. Warmly, Craig." You sent that. Did you not?
I don't dispute that was sent.
Sorry. You got yourself in a lot of trouble here. You've just said a moment ago you thought that the Prime Minister's senior advisor, Mr. Chen, had no role in the establishment of the program, but I have correspondence where you thanked him for helping shape that very program. So why did you thank him for shaping the program when now you claim you didn't know he played any role in the program?
My EA wanted to personalize, and very kindly, as a great EA, wrote a few lines to 100 different LinkedIn requests that went that same day to different people to join my LinkedIn page.
No, but this was not a mess. Excuse me, Craig, you're in a lot of trouble here, my friend. You're under oath. Perjury is a crime. Excuse me. You said a moment ago that you thought the Prime Minister's chief advisor had no role in establishing this program. Your message to him did not say, "Thank you for joining me on LinkedIn." It said, "Thank you for your kindness in helping shape our latest program with the government. Warmly, Craig." So which is it? I want to ask you clearly. Did you know that Mr. Chen was playing a role in establishing this program? Yes or no?
No.
Now, that exchange you could see on Pierre Poilievre's Twitter account in full. It's about 5 minutes long, so I didn't want to play the entirety of it. But again, it shows that on one hand, they're all about schmoozing, building these relationships, thanking people in the PMO for shaping the program. And then on the other hand, they're saying, "Oh, no, that was just my assistant just sent like a nice little LinkedIn invitation." So now I actually have to go through my LinkedIn invitations and see if I've been, thanking anyone for helping shape a billion-dollar program. I don't think I have, but one never knows. What the Conservatives are trying to do here by bringing the Kielburgers back is revive the scandal. And the problem with this from a strategic perspective is that by and large, Canadians have moved on. And even the mainstream media coverage of this has been very minimal. It's mostly been from Conservative columnists, a couple of stories, but it's lost the momentum. And like so many other scandals, like SNC-Lavalin, like Trudeau and Blackface, like We Charity, Canadians tend to move on. The Liberals have this Teflon-like quality about them that tends to let them shirk responsibility for their actions. So what's going to happen from here, I don't know. At a certain point, it just becomes theatrical to keep bringing them back and asking these questions when we know what happened. We absolutely know what happened. We know that we was influence peddling with MPs. We know that the Liberals were cozying up to their friends. We know it's plain as day in front of us. The issue is, do Canadians care? And this is, to go back to the first segment, one of the benefits, I think, of recall is that if there is something that genuinely makes people mad and distrustful of their politicians, it gives them a somewhat immediate remedy so that you can't do what politicians do now, which is just hope that people will forget about it and move on by the time the election rolls around. It lets people respond right away and say, well, hang on, this is not acceptable. So there's a lot of truth to that. The more I talk about it, the more firmly I become in support of recall. We've got to take a break. When we come back, more of the Andrew Lawton Show. And by the way, when I say we come back, I mean you and me, not capital W, capital E. Hopefully they'll never come back. More of the Andrew Lawton Show up next. Stay with me.
You're tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Welcome back to the Andrew Lawton Show. Well, politics goes on even in the course of a pandemic, and this weekend, the Conservative Party of Canada is having a virtual convention. Normally, these are very big to-dos, policy conventions that bring in people from around the country. They vote on various resolutions, amendments to party policy, and they can become battlegrounds in a lot of cases for what the grassroots of the party thinks and what they want on certain key issues. And one area where we always see this unfold is the battle between social conservatives and pro-life members of the party, and oftentimes those who don't want those people to have a say in party policy. If you look at the convention this weekend, 34 of 196 ideas submitted by the party's riding associations will make it to the floor for debate, and none of those are on abortion, despite a very significant effort from pro-life groups and individuals. I want to talk about this with Scott Hayward, who is the co-founder of RightNow and joins me on the line. Scott, good to talk to you again. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks, Andrew. It's always great to be on your show, and thanks for the invitation.
Now, people that aren't members of the Conservative Party or a political party, or people who have never participated in this process might not know, but the party policy, what is that?
So the party policy document, is a document that is utilized by most political parties in this country. And it's more or less the official stance of that political party on a variety of issues, whether it be the environment or foreign affairs or economy, crime, things of this nature. So the Conservative Party of Canada, like you mentioned, is having their biannual, so every 2 years, their policy convention coming up later this week.
And how does it differ from the platform?
So the platform is put together by the leader, by the caucus, by party staff, as the platform going into an election campaign on specifically what a political party intends to do should they form government after the election. Most political parties will establish their platform based off of the official party policy document we just discussed, which is voted on and proposed by members of the party about once every 2 years by most political parties. So what's happening this weekend for the Conservative Party of Canada and next weekend for the Liberal Party of Canada is going to be informative for both political parties, as we likely are going into an election sometime later this spring.
So you've answered the next question I had, which was why this matters. So I'll skip ahead to the question after that, which is that why are these such battlegrounds, and how have we seen that battle manifest for social conservatives and pro-lifers specifically leading up to this convention?
So it's important that various constituents within political parties are able to express their views, their values, and want to see that reflected within both the party platform, but also the party policy document, which of course informs the platform. So within the Conservative Party of Canada, you have a variety of different types of conservatives. You have, Western Canadian conservatives who are very focused on natural resource development. You have Democratic conservatives who are focused on making sure that grassroots are heard regardless of a variety of views. You have libertarians, you have red Tories, and then you have pro-lifers and social conservatives in general. So everyone gets to get involved in this process within the Conservative Party of Canada, bring up different policy ideas that are voted on by EDA, those Electoral District Association Board of Directors. There's one in each of the 338 ridings. And then they're submitted for the Conservative Party of Canada, at least, on a thing called Ideas Lab, where each EDA is allowed 25 votes to vote amongst the various policy proposals. So this time around, like you mentioned, there were 196 policy proposals. The EDAs got to vote, and then the 34 that are being voted on and debated later this week were the 34 most popular across the country.
I should say, by the way, that Schoolhouse Rock has absolutely nothing on you and how well you can describe and clearly articulate these complex matters, which people may find uninteresting, but are actually very significant to people in the conservative movement in Canada, and I'd say in the country more broadly. So let me ask you about this, because I've seen a lot of people circulating stories about the fact that none of the pro-life amendments or resolutions made it on there. This is just because they lost in a vote. It's not because there was someone that handpicked these resolutions and said, we don't want that one on the convention floor, correct?
That's a great question, Andrew, and it's something that I've heard and seen a lot within the past week or so. That used to be the policy process within the Conservative Party of Canada. EDAs would come up with party policies, and they would go to a secretive convention committee, and that committee, which was more or less appointed, got to decide, which policies would make it to the convention breakout rooms, and then, of course, to the convention floor. Over the past number of years, within the Conservative Party of Canada, we've seen a devolution toward the grassroots within the party. So now the process is that EDAs put it on an internal website called the Ideas Lab and cast a vote. So it's much more grassroots this time around than it was, let's say, 10 years ago. This time around, we proposed two pro-life policies. One was to eliminate the only pro-abortion policy in the Conservative Party of Canada policy declaration. That's currently Article 70 that says a Conservative government will not support legislation to regulate abortion. And then we had a second policy proposed from the riding of Burlington within the GTA that asked that a future Conservative government would seek to introduce and vote for and support legislation that would legally restrict sex-selective and late-term abortions. In Canada, according to recent polls within the past 12 months or so, something like 84% of Canadians support legal restrictions on sex-selective abortions, and up to 70%, including 60% in Ontario and 67% in Quebec, support late-term abortion restrictions. Canada, as most of your viewers would probably know, is one of only two countries in the world where there's absolutely no law whatsoever on abortion. So these were the two policies that we put forward. They were voted on by the EDAs. Our initial, and these new rules were known months ago, by the way, Andrew. Like, they were established months ago by the Convention Committee, by the National Policy Committee and National Constitution Committee and National Councils, those three organs all being voted on by members of the party. And so we knew the rules going into Christmas. So we knew it was going to be tough, but we had an opportunity, and we knew kind of what the pathway was. So our goal was to get 45 EDA votes for both of those pro-life policies. And when we blew past them, I was actually shocked at how many votes we got. We got 63 for delete 70, and we got around 55 for the late-term abortion one. As a comparison, last time in Halifax for that convention in 2018, we only got about maybe 25. I don't even think we got up to 30 for the delete 71, and that one didn't make it to convention floor. So this time the bar is a little higher. And there was no dirty tricks or nasty tricks, as some other organizations say, by the political party. It was simply that pro-lifers have not yet taken their rightful place on those EDA board of directors, something that we're looking to fix within the coming weeks and months. One last thing I will say is that there was an extreme, I would describe it as extreme pro-abortion policy proposed by one of the EDAs that made the current pro-abortion policy even worse from our perspective. That one didn't do so hot on Ideas Lab. It only got about 10 EDA votes or so, but there were a couple EDA boards of directors who voted for that policy, yet their slate of delegates to the convention is 100% pro-life. So there's a big disconnect between those who sit on the EDA boards and the actual members of the party within that riding. And so we're looking for the next AGMs within the next 8 to 12 months to correct that disconnect, if you will.
You mentioned something in there that I found interesting. You said they're not dirty tricks. The pro-lifers were effectively outmaneuvered. And I don't mean that in a cynical way, but just they didn't have the votes on this. Do you feel that there is an issue with pro-lifers not wanting to engage? Either they don't think it's worth it, or they're fed up with either the political process or more specifically the Conservative Party? Or do you think it is just that they are a smaller share of the party than they used to be?
I don't think we're a smaller share of the party. I think, if anything, we're actually a growing share of the party. If you look at the number of candidates who had won the nominations for the 2019 election, the number of pro-lifers who were elected for the Conservative Party of Canada amongst the new members of Parliament who were elected to the House of Commons in the last election, the last two leadership races.
Just on that point, I mean, the leadership factor is significant. Both Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer, demonstrably, you can see in the numbers, were pushed to victory by pro-lifers and by social conservatives. So I guess why is that not translating to the policy process?
It's a good question. So as time goes on, more or less the actual necessary work within the political sphere in Canada for the pro-life movement has more or less been neglected, I would say, for the last 40 so years. So since we started in 2016, just over 5 years ago, it's been our job over the last 5 years to get pro-lifers more involved in the process, because we have the numbers. It's simply that they're not involved within the process. They're not informed, and they don't quite know what to do in order to make sure that their voices are heard within the right structures of, for example, the Conservative Party of Canada, and eventually, as we grow, within other political parties as well. So, like I said, last time around, we only had about 25 or 30 EDA votes for our pro-life policies. This time, we more than doubled it, in some cases tripled. Still quite isn't enough. We know which EDAs where we need to get pro-lifers to make sure that they are properly represented on those board of directors. And we're finding that through this process, because for our organization, and I might as well just tell you now because it's already baked in, there's about 4,000 delegates that are attending this convention. And from our analysis within our database, about 1 out of every 4 of those delegates comes from our RightNow database. That's a huge, huge number. Right off the bat, we have 25% of the delegates being from RightNow. And there are other pro-life organizations that are getting delegates there. There are people within the party who are attending the convention who might not be in any of the databases or are just naturally pro-life. So I would say, in terms of the delegates at this convention, probably well over half right across the country are somewhere on the pro-life spectrum. So it's just a matter of we keep going forward, we keep informing pro-lifers of what they need to do. And to be frank, they're starting to step up. A lot of pro-lifers have told me, delegates, saying, what's this EDA, what's this policy committee, and how can I be a part of it, and how can my friends be a part of it? And that's really great. So the next 8 to 12 months are going to be really exciting for us in the pro-life movement as we take that next step, as we mature within the Conservative Party of Canada and take our rightful place.
Now, I know every virtual event is a bit wacky in how it's formatted, but is there going to be an opportunity for emotions from the floor at this convention, as there have been at in-person conventions in the past?
Well, since the formation of the Conservative Party of Canada, which was an amalgamation between, of course, the Canadian Alliance and the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada, within the Constitution, there is no opportunity for motions from the floor. That used to be something that used to be within the Reform Party. I can't remember if it was in the Canadian Alliance or not.
Yeah, and it's big in the Ontario PC Party too, I know.
Yeah. So within the federal party, that has never been something that's been allowed. To be frank, I think it's reasonable because the process to get to convention, whether it be constitutional amendments or national council candidates or even policy proposals, is relatively grassroots within the Conservative Party of Canada. So I think it's reasonable that once you get to convention, you focus on the things that actually made it to convention. Because otherwise, you can have all kinds of motions or whatever, and it's going to take a really long time to get through everything. They have hours and hours and hours of policy debate. So, there isn't an opportunity within the Constitution of the party as it is now for any motions from the floor, so to speak.
I hear a lot of frustration from social conservatives in the Conservative Party or in Canada more broadly about where things are. They feel they don't have a voice. Aaron O'Toole, a big part of his leadership was that he personally isn't a social conservative. He's personally pro-choice, but he wants to listen to pro-life voices. Do you think there is reason for social conservatives in the conservative movement to be optimistic right now?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I know a lot of people, a lot of pro-lifers were upset over the Derek Sloan expulsion, and I think that there's legitimate questions about, $131 being donated to his leadership campaign when he was raising hundreds of thousands, if not millions, from a racist under a different name. I think that's a very spurious charge and a very spurious reason to eject a member of caucus from caucus. But that being said, Aaron O'Toole, when he spoke to our organization during the leadership race, he was very clear, like he said, on his personal stances. But he also did, offer pro-lifers a couple different things. Number one, he said free votes within the House of Commons on our issues, something that has been a long-standing tradition within the Conservative Party of Canada, and something, by the way, that the Peter MacKay campaign, leadership campaign, was not promising and then changed their minds on. Number two, it was that he would fight tooth and nail against the expansion of assisted suicide. And I think we've seen that. Aaron personally has spoken about it numerous times, specifically from a personal perspective regarding his own mother going through something similar when she was sadly dying of cancer when he was a young boy. He spoke about it in the House of Commons recently this past autumn against the expansion of assisted suicide. And when the finalized version of the bill came forward to the House last week, we saw that every single member of the Conservative caucus who was present voted against that legislation. So, under Aaron's leadership, we have seen pro-lifers be able to maneuver in a couple of things. Kathy Wakenthal, she has her sex-selective abortion bill, private members bill, coming forward to the House in about a month's time. Hopefully sooner rather than later, it'll have a second reading vote in the House of Commons. And then the third thing he promised, or at least indicated that he would do within our interview during the leadership race, which is available on our website, is that he would campaign against funding of abortion overseas. Now, that has yet to come to pass because there hasn't been an election yet. So I think we have to give Aaron O'Toole some time to see what he will do and not do. But on the things that he did say that he would do so far, he has been able to do it. And of course, Aaron O'Toole is one of 338 members of Parliament. We have 337 ridings we have to focus on. We have a number of pro-life members of Parliament who will be running for re-election, and we have to focus to make sure that we get them re-elected. So if pro-lifers out there are kind of disappointed or disillusioned with Aaron O'Toole, only the people who live in the riding of Durham can vote for or against Aaron O'Toole. We have other pro-lifers that we have to make sure that they get elected to the House of Commons in this upcoming election, and that's what our goal is going to be going forward.
Co-founder of RightNow, Scott Hayward. Scott, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, Andrew. Much appreciated.
It's actually somewhat funny. I got to point out just before we wrap things up, this story. Global News had this bombshell exclusive that Ontario MPP Sam Oosterhoff is pro-life. I know. This is like a Pulitzer-winning report from Global News. So the story was that Sam Oosterhoff is apparently affiliating himself with a group that compares abortion to Holocaust. And what they mean is that he's speaking at a pro-life campus event, and one of the groups involved in putting together the event had at one point tweeted a comparison between abortion, which has claimed millions of lives, and the Holocaust. Now, whether you like or appreciate or respect those comparisons or not, he is speaking at a pro-life event hosted by a pro-life group, and Global News takes 800 words to basically say, pro-lifers bad, Sam Oosterhoff pro-life. And I was reading this, and I'm like, I'm failing to see the story here, but this is the media culture. And this is why, to Scott Hayward's point, changing the culture, focusing on local candidates, focusing on individual MPs has been, I think, an important task of the pro-life movement, and one in which they have a lot more victories than just trying to get the media on side, which clearly isn't going to happen. In any case, my thanks again to Scott Hayward from RightNow, and all of you for tuning in. We'll be back in just a couple of days' time with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show here on True North. Thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.